Charles Adams stood frozen in the docking bay of the Nigerian spaceport, his mind reeling from the words of Jackson, the blue-skinned Nigerian diplomat before him. "I apologize, Captain Adams, but our law is clear. 4 Nigerian females must please you during your stay." The decorated human soldier blinked, certain he had misheard. "Excuse me?" Jackson's 3 eyes darted nervously. The High Council enacted this law to foster positive relations with Earth. 4 females are legally required to sexually please any human male visitor. Charles felt his stomach lurch. This had to be a mistake. He had come to Nigeria as part of a diplomatic mission, not some interstellar bachelor party. There must be some misunderstanding. I can't possibly... Refusal would be a grave insult, Jackson interrupted, his voice tinged with desperation. It could jeopardize the alliance between our peoples. The gravity of the situation hit Charles like a photon torpedo. He was caught between his ethics, his duty to Earth, and the bizarre alien law that now threatened years of careful diplomacy. "This is absurd," Charles protested. "Have you contacted Earth about this? Surely our government wouldn't agree to such a thing." Jackson's skin rippled in what Charles recognized as the Nigerian equivalent of a grimace. The law was enacted quickly, under internal political pressure. Your superiors are still processing the information. Charles considered his options. Leaving immediately crossed his mind, but Jackson quickly dispelled that notion. Some factions would see a hasty departure as an act of aggression. As the implications sank in, Charles realized the magnitude of the diplomatic crisis unfolding around him. The Nigerian High Council, citing ancient traditions and the sanctity of their laws, refused to back down. Earth's government, blindsided by the situation, had yet to provide clear guidance. Meanwhile, news of the situation was spreading like wildfire across both planets. Charles could almost feel the weight of 2 worlds watching, waiting to see how he would respond to this outlandish demand. And what of the 4 Nigerian females? Charles learned they had initially been excited about the prospect of interacting with a human. Now, as they learned more about human physiology and cultural norms, doubts were setting in. The last thing Charles wanted was to make anyone uncomfortable or feel coerced. Time was running out. Soon Charles would be expected to meet these 4 alien women, with the fate of interplanetary relations hanging in the balance. He needed to find a way out of this predicament without causing offense or violating his own principles. As Jackson led him towards the diplomatic quarters, Charles's mind raced. How had a simple mission turned into this surreal nightmare? More importantly, how could he navigate this minefield of alien customs and misunderstood human biology without triggering an interstellar incident? One thing was certain. This was going to be the most challenging and bizarre mission of his career. Charles took a deep breath, his mind racing as he followed Jackson towards the diplomatic quarters. The absurdity of the situation threatened to overwhelm him, but years of military training kicked in. He needed a plan, and fast. "Jackson," Charles said, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil, "I appreciate the honor your people wish to bestow upon me. However, I believe there's been a misunderstanding about human customs and biology. Perhaps we could arrange a cultural exchange instead?" Jackson's 3 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of surprise. "A cultural exchange? What do you propose, Captain Adams?" "I'd like to meet with the 4 Nigerian females in a neutral public setting. We can discuss our respective cultures, customs, and societal norms. This would foster understanding between our peoples without violating any personal boundaries." Jackson considered this for a moment, his skin rippling with what Charles had learned was deep thought. "An interesting proposal. I will present it to the High Council. It may buy us some time, at least." Over the next few hours, Charles paced in his quarters, reviewing everything he knew about Nigerian culture. When Jackson returned with news of the Council's cautious approval, Charles felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The following day, Charles found himself seated in a garden-like atrium, facing 4 Nigerian females. Their blue skins shimmered in the artificial sunlight, and their 3 eyes regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. "Welcome," Charles began, his translator working overtime. "I'm Captain Charles Adams. I'm honored to meet you all. Perhaps we could start by introducing ourselves. The females exchanged glances before one stepped forward. I am Zara, she said, her voice carrying a melodic quality. I specialize in xenobiology. Lyra, the second female said softly. I am a counselor in our healing centers. The third female straightened her posture. I'm Vex. I serve in our planetary defense force. The fourth female remained quiet for a moment before speaking. Naya, I work in our central archives. Charles nodded to each of them. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I thought we could start by discussing some fundamental aspects of human culture, particularly our concepts of personal space and consent. As Charles explained these ideas, he noticed varying reactions from his audience. Zara leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with scientific curiosity. Lyra nodded empathetically, while Vex seemed to be analyzing his words for tactical implications. Naya remained still, but her intense gaze never left Charles' face. In human culture, Charles continued, physical intimacy is typically reserved for those with whom we have a deep emotional connection. It's not something we engage in lightly or as a matter of diplomatic protocol. Zara's head tilted. Fascinating. This differs greatly from our understanding. We were led to believe that humans sought physical gratification as a primary goal. Charles suppressed a sigh. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. While physical attraction is a part of human nature, it's not our sole driving force. We value emotional connections, intellectual compatibility, and shared experiences. As the conversation progressed, Charles found himself increasingly drawn to Naya. Unlike the others, she rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were measured and insightful. Her quiet intelligence intrigued him, and he often found his gaze lingering on her. Over the next few days, Charles continued these cultural exchange sessions, learning more about Nigean society in return. During one such meeting, Lyra revealed a startling piece of information. Our population growth has stagnated in recent centuries, she explained. The High Council believed that introducing human genetic diversity might solve this issue. Charles blinked in surprise. I see, but surely there are other solutions that don't involve, well, this law. Vex nodded vigorously. Many of us have questioned the wisdom of this decision. It was implemented hastily, without proper research. As Charles processed this information, he noticed Naya watching him intently. When their eyes met, she quickly looked away, a deeper blue tinting her cheeks. Unbeknownst to Charles, Jackson observed these interactions from a hidden alcove. The Nigean diplomat found himself impressed by the humans' handling of the situation. As he watched, doubts about the new law began to creep into his mind. Back in his quarters that evening, Charles received an urgent communication from Earth. Admiral Helena Reeves's face appeared on the screen, her expression grave. Captain Adams, we've been briefed on your situation. I'm dispatching Lieutenant Commander Marcus Parker to assist you. He's an expert in xenobiology and interspecies relations. His ship should arrive within 48 hours. Charles felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Thank you, Admiral. The situation here is delicate. I understand, Captain. Find a way to drive this without offending the Nigeans or compromising our principles. Earth is counting on you. As the transmission ended, Charles slumped in his chair. He had 2 days to find a solution before Parker arrived. Rubbing his temples, he began to formulate a plan. The next morning, Charles proposed a series of joint human-Nigean scientific studies to address the real issues behind Nigea's population decline. He presented this idea to Jackson, hoping it would provide an alternative to the current law. Jackson's skin rippled with interest. An intriguing proposal, Captain. I will present it to the High Council immediately. However, as Charles waited for a response, a new message arrived from Jackson. The Nigean's words sent a chill down Charles's spine. The High Council grows impatient. They demand compliance with the law within 48 hours, or Earth's entire diplomatic mission will be expelled from Nigeria. I fear this could lead to conflict between our worlds. Charles stared at the message, the weight of 2 civilizations pressing down on his shoulders. He had less than 2 days to find a solution that would satisfy Nigean law without compromising his principles or Earth's diplomatic standing. As he contemplated his next move, Charles found his thoughts drifting to Naya. Her quiet strength and perceptive nature had become a source of comfort in this chaotic situation. But he knew that any personal entanglement could further complicate matters. With time running out and tensions escalating, Charles realized he was walking a razor's edge. One wrong move could spark an interplanetary incident. As he prepared for another meeting with the Nigean females, he silently hoped that a solution would present itself before it was too late. Charles stood at the window of his quarters, watching the alien landscape of Nigeria as the clock ticked relentlessly towards the High Council's ultimatum. His mind raced, searching for a solution that would satisfy both his principles and the delicate balance of interplanetary diplomacy. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. It was Jackson, requesting an urgent meeting. Charles straightened his uniform and headed to the diplomatic wing, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Jackson's three eyes darted nervously as Charles entered his office. "Captain Adams, I've been analyzing the impact of this new law. The results are concerning." Charles leaned forward, hope flickering in his chest. "What have you found?" Jackson produced a datapad, his blue fingers trembling slightly. "There's evidence of increased social unrest, economic instability, and even a rise in interspecies conflicts. This law is hurting our people, not helping them." Charles nodded, his expression grim. "We need to present this to the High Council. Will you help me build a case for repealing the law?" Before Jackson could respond, a commotion erupted in the corridor. The door slid open, revealing a familiar face. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Parker. "Captain Adams," Parker said, his voice tight with tension. "I've just arrived, and already I'm being accosted by Nigen officials about this absurd law." Charles quickly brought Parker up to speed. The xenobiologist's eyes widened as he processed the information. "This is preposterous," Parker exclaimed. "Human and Nigean physiology are completely incompatible for reproductive purposes. The entire premise of this law is flawed." A spark of an idea ignited in Charles' mind. "Can you prove that scientifically?" Parker nodded confidently. "Give me access to your research facilities, and I'll have a comprehensive report ready within hours." As Parker set off to gather evidence, Charles resumed his cultural exchange sessions with the four Nigean females. The atmosphere in the room was tense, the weight of the impending deadline hanging over them all. During a break in the discussion, Naya approached Charles, her voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, there's something you need to know." Charles leaned in, intrigued by the urgency in her tone. Naya's three eyes darted around the room before she continued. "I've been researching in the Central Archives. There's evidence of corruption within our government. High-ranking officials have personal stakes in fertility clinics and genetic research facilities. They stand to gain enormously from an influx of human genetic material." Charles felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying this law is driven by personal profit rather than cultural traditions?" Naya nodded solemnly. "Exactly, and I have the data to prove it." Armed with this new information, Charles and Jackson prepared to present their case to the High Council. As they made their way through the winding corridors of the government complex, a group of blue-skinned Nigeans emerged from the shadows. "Halt!" one of them shouted, his voice filled with anger. "We cannot allow you to destroy our traditions." Charles recognized them as radical traditionalists, vehemently opposed to any change in the law. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "We're not here to destroy anything. We just want to present new information to the council." The lead traditionalist lunged forward, his three-fingered hand reaching for Charles's throat. Years of military training kicked in, and Charles sidestepped the attack, using the Nigean's momentum to throw him off balance. Jackson, caught in the middle of the scuffle, cried out in alarm. Charles moved to protect him, blocking a blow from another attacker. The commotion drew the attention of nearby security forces, who rushed to intervene. In the chaos that followed, Charles found himself restrained by Nigean security officers. He watched helplessly as Jackson was pulled away, the diplomat's skin rippling with distress. News of the altercation spread like wildfire across Nigeria. Holoscreens throughout the city flashed with images of the human diplomat being led away in restraints. The public reaction was immediate and intense. In the detention center, Charles paced his cell, frustration building with each passing moment. He could hear the growing clamor of voices outside, protesters demanding answers, citizens questioning their government's motives. Meanwhile, Marcus Parker found himself thrust into the role of lead diplomat. He stood before the Nigen High Council, his voice steady as he presented his findings. "Members of the Council," Parker began, "I submit to you irrefutable evidence that human and Nigean physiologies are fundamentally incompatible for reproductive purposes. The premise of your law is scientifically unsound." The council chambers erupted into murmurs of surprise and disbelief. As the Nigean scientists scrambled to verify Parker's claims, valuable time was bought. Back on Earth, Admiral Helena Reeves watched the situation unfold with growing concern. She made a decision, her voice firm as she addressed her communications officer. "Initiate an emergency video conference with the Nigean High Council. Now." The Admiral's face appeared on the massive screen in the council chambers, her expression stern. "Members of the High Council, I speak to you now with the full authority of Earth's government. If this situation is not commitment peacefully and immediately, we will have no choice but to withdraw all human diplomatic presence from Nigeria." The council members exchanged alarmed glances, fully aware of the economic and security implications of losing Earth's alliance. As tensions reached a boiling point, Zara, Lyra, Vex, and Naya gathered outside the detention center where Charles was held. They raised their voices in unison, demanding his release and the repeal of the law. Their peaceful demonstration drew more and more supporters, the crowd swelling with each passing hour. Inside his cell, Charles could hear the chants of the protesters. A mix of hope and apprehension filled him as he realized the far-reaching consequences of this crisis. The future of human-Nigen relations, perhaps even the future of interspecies interactions across the galaxy, hung in the balance. As the High Council called an emergency session to review the law, Charles was escorted from his cell to the council chambers. He saw Naya and the others in the crowd, their presence giving him strength. Taking a deep breath, he prepared to make his final appeal, knowing that his words could either bridge the gap between their species or drive them irreparably apart. The council chambers fell silent as Charles stepped forward, all eyes upon him. The fate of two worlds rested on his shoulders as he opened his mouth to speak, the tension in the room palpable. The council chambers fell silent as Charles stepped forward, all eyes upon him. The fate of two worlds rested on his shoulders as he opened his mouth to speak, the tension in the room palpable. Suddenly, a cacophony of shouts and thundering footsteps erupted from beyond the chamber doors. The heavy panels burst open, revealing a surge of blue-skinned Nigeans led by a tall, imposing figure with piercing yellow eyes. "This farce ends now," the leader bellowed, his voice reverberating through the stunned silence. "We demand the immediate enforcement of our sacred law." Charles recognized the leader as Drax, a notorious radical traditionalist known for his fiery rhetoric and unwavering stance against off-world influence. The security forces scrambled to form a barrier between the intruders and the council, their weapons raised uncertainly. In that moment of chaos, Charles made a split-second decision. He stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace, his voice cutting through the din with surprising authority. "Drax, I presume," Charles called out, meeting the Nigean's intense gaze. "I understand your concerns. Let's discuss this openly, here and now, before all of Nigeria." Drax faltered, clearly caught off guard by the human's bold approach. The chamber held its collective breath as the two faced each other across the room. "You have no right to challenge our ways," Drax snarled, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Charles nodded, his expression calm. "You're right. I don't. But I do have the right to present facts and engage in honest dialogue. I propose a public debate. You and a council representative arguing for the law, myself and a colleague presenting our perspective. Let the people of Nigeria hear both sides and decide for themselves." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even Drax's followers exchanged glances, intrigued by the offer. High Counselor Vorn, a stern-faced Nigen with deep blue skin, stepped forward. "This is highly irregular, but perhaps it has merit. Drax, will you agree to this terms? After a tense moment, Drax nodded curtly. Very well. Let the human try to defend his position. It will only prove the righteousness of our cause. Within hours, the Great Hall of Nigeia was transformed into a debate stage. Hollow screens flickered to life across the planet as millions of Nigerians tuned in to witness this unprecedented event. Charles stood at one podium, with Marcus Parker beside him. Across the stage, Drax and Counselor Vorn took their positions, their postures rigid with purpose. As the debate began, Charles carefully laid out the scientific evidence gathered by Jackson and Marcus, explaining the physiological incompatibilities between humans and Nigerians. He watched as confusion and disbelief rippled through the audience. But even if reproduction were possible, Charles continued, his voice steady, we must consider the deeper implications. Is it right to force individuals into relationships for the sake of genetic diversity? What about personal choice and cultural autonomy? Drax countered with impassioned pleas about Nigerian tradition and the need to preserve their species. But as the debate wore on, cracks began to appear in his arguments. Suddenly, Naya burst onto the stage, her scales shimmering with excitement. She thrust a datapad into Marcus's hands, her voice breathless. New evidence, genetic analysis, conclusive proof of incompatibility. Marcus quickly scanned the information, his eyes widening. He stepped up to the microphone, presenting the findings with clear, irrefutable scientific explanations. The Great Hall erupted in a storm of voices as Nigerians grappled with this new information. Charles watched as doubt and anger spread across faces in the crowd. The tide of public opinion was shifting before his eyes. In a stunning turn of events, Counselor Vorn's posture suddenly slumped. He stepped forward, his voice heavy with resignation. I can no longer perpetuate this deception, Vorn announced, silencing the hall. The law was never about preserving our species. It was pushed through by a consortium of corporations, hoping to profit from human genetic material. I was part of that conspiracy, and I can no longer bear the weight of that shame. The revelation sent shockwaves through the audience. Drax stumbled back, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. The other council members huddled together, their scales rippling with agitation as they whispered urgently. In the ensuing chaos, the High Council hastily convened an emergency session. Within hours, they emerged with a unanimous decision. The controversial law would be immediately repealed, and a full investigation into governmental corruption would be launched. As the news spread across Nigeria, Charles found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. Nigerians approached him with a mix of gratitude, curiosity, and lingering wariness. He answered questions tirelessly, always emphasizing the importance of mutual understanding and respect between their species. In a quiet moment amidst the frenzy, Charles sought out Naya. He found her in a secluded garden, her scales shimmering in the soft light of Nigeria's moons. I couldn't have done this without you, Charles said softly, his admiration evident in his voice. Your bravery, your intelligence, you've changed the course of history for both our peoples. Naya's eyes met his, a deeper blue tinting her cheeks. You showed us a different way, Charles, a way of facing challenges with integrity and compassion. As they stood there, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions, Charles's communicator chimed. Admiral Helena Reeves's face appeared on the small screen, her expression a mix of pride and urgency. Captain Adams, outstanding work, she said briskly. But we have a new situation developing. There's a critical diplomatic mission in the Andromeda sector. We need your skills there immediately. Charles felt a weight settle in his chest as he glanced at Naya. The choice before him was suddenly, painfully clear. Duty to Earth or the promise of something new and profound on Nigeria. As he opened his mouth to respond to the Admiral, Zara, Lyra, and Vex approached, their faces alight with excitement. Captain Adams, Zara began, her voice filled with tenacity. We have a proposal for you and your superiors. Captain Adams, Zara began, her voice filled with tenacity. We have a proposal for you and your team. We believe a cultural exchange program between Nigeria and Earth could prevent future misunderstandings and strengthen our alliance. Charles listened intently as Zara outlined their vision, his mind racing with possibilities. However, the chirp of his communicator interrupted the conversation. Admiral Reeves' stern face reappeared on the screen. "Captain, I need your answer now. The situation in the Andromeda sector is deteriorating rapidly." Charles took a deep breath, his gaze moving from the eager faces of his Nigean friends to the expectant expression of his commanding officer. In that moment, he made his decision. "Admiral, I accept the assignment," he said firmly. "However, I request a 1-month extension to remain on Nigeria. We have an opportunity here to establish a groundbreaking cultural exchange program that could revolutionize our interspecies relations." Admiral Reeves's brow furrowed, but after a moment she nodded. "Very well, Captain. 1 month. Make it count." As the screen went dark, Charles turned to his companions. "Let's get to work." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Charles and Jackson worked tirelessly with Nigerian officials to lay the groundwork for the exchange program. They designed curricula, established safety protocols, and coordinated with Earth's diplomatic corps. During this time, Charles and Naya grew closer. They spent their evenings exploring the bioluminescent forests of Nigeria, their conversations ranging from the intricacies of interstellar politics to their personal hopes and fears. One night, as they stood atop a cliff overlooking a shimmering ocean, Naya turned to Charles, her scales rippling with a mix of emotions. "I'll miss this when you're gone," she said softly. Charles reached out, his fingers gently brushing her arm. "We'll find a way to stay connected, no matter the distance," he promised. Their moment was interrupted by an urgent call from Jackson. "Charles, we have a problem. A group calling themselves the Purity Front is protesting outside the new cultural center." Upon arrival, Charles found a crowd of agitated Nigerians led by a tall, imposing figure with deep crimson scales. Krell, the leader of the Purity Front, spotted Charles and pointed accusingly. "Look, the human who seeks to corrupt our genetic purity," Krell shouted, his followers echoing his anger. Charles stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We're not here to change who you are," he said calmly. "We're here to learn from each other, to grow together as galactic neighbors." His words seemed to give some of the protesters pause, but Krell was unmoved. "Pretty words from a pretty liar," he snarled. Over the next few days, the Purity Front escalated their tactics. They vandalized buildings associated with the exchange program and launched a propaganda campaign filled with misinformation about human biology and intentions. Charles and his team worked around the clock to counter these efforts. They organized town halls, distributed accurate information, and increased security measures around key facilities. 1 week before Charles's scheduled departure, disaster struck. The Purity Front attempted to sabotage the interstellar communication array, threatening to cut off Nigeria from Earth and its allies. Charles led a team to defend the array, racing against time to stop Krell and his followers. As they approached the facility, they found themselves caught in a firefight between Nigerian security forces and the extremists. In the chaos, Charles spotted a group of civilian technicians trapped in the crossfire. Without hesitation, he sprinted towards them, using his body as a shield as he guided them to safety. A stray energy blast caught Charles in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Through the haze of pain, he saw Krell advancing, weapon raised. But before the extremist leader could fire, Naya appeared, her scales blazing with righteous fury. She disarmed Krell with a swift move, pinning him to the ground. As security forces rounded up the remaining Purity Front members, Charles felt himself being lifted onto a stretcher. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Naya's worried face above him. Charles awoke in a Nigerian medical facility, his body aching but healing. Naya sat beside him, her scales shimmering with relief. "You gave us quite a scare," she said, squeezing his hand. Before Charles could respond, the door opened, revealing Admiral Reeves. Her holographic form flickered as she stepped into the room. "Captain Adams," she began, her tone uncharacteristically warm, "your actions have not gone unnoticed. The Galactic Council has extended an invitation for you to join their ranks as a special envoy for human-alien relations." Charles blinked in surprise. The Galactic Council? But what about the Andromeda mission? This opportunity takes precedence, Reeves explained. You've shown a unique talent for navigating interspecies relations. The Council believes you could do even more good on a galactic scale. As Charles processed this information, Naya spoke up. I have news too, she said, her scales flickering with excitement. I've been accepted into an advanced xenobiology program on Earth. Charles looked between Naya and the hologram of Admiral Reeves, his legs shaking with possibilities. The decision before him was monumental, with far-reaching consequences for his personal life and the future of human-alien relations. As he opened his mouth to speak, alarms blared throughout the facility. A frantic medical officer burst into the room, his scales pale with fear. We're under attack, he shouted. Unknown ships have entered Nigean space. They're demanding to speak with the human diplomat. Charles struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He exchanged a determined look with Naya before turning to Admiral Reeves's hologram. Admiral, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. I think my decision just got a lot more complicated. Complicated, Charles finished, his mind already racing with possibilities. Admiral Reeves' hologram flickered as she processed the new information. Captain, I'm redirecting our nearest ships to your location. Hold your position and gather as much intelligence as you can. As the hologram faded, Charles turned to Naya. We need to get to the command center. Can you help me up? Naya nodded, her scales shimmering with concern as she supported Charles. They made their way through the chaos-filled corridors, the facility's alarms still blaring. In the command center, they found a flurry of activity. Nigean officials huddled around holographic displays, their scales rippling with anxiety as they tracked the unknown vessels. What do we know? Charles asked, his voice cutting through the din. A Nigean officer turned to him, her scales a pale blue. 3 ships, unknown configuration. They're holding position just outside our defensive perimeter. Charles studied the display, his mind working furiously. Open a channel, he ordered. As the communication link established, a gravelly voice filled the room. Human diplomat, we know you're there. We have a proposition for you and your Nigean friends. Charles exchanged a glance with Naya before responding. I'm listening. Your recent actions have attracted the attention of certain interested parties, the voice continued. We represent a coalition of species who believe that the current galactic order is flawed. We offer you a chance to be part of something greater. Charles' eyes narrowed. And if we refuse? A chuckle crackled through the speakers. Then we'll be forced to take more persuasive measures. You have 1 hour to decide. As the transmission cut off, the room erupted into heated discussions. Charles turned to Naya, his expression grim. We need to buy time. Can you contact Earth and update them on the situation? Naya nodded, her scales flickering with willpower as she moved to a communication console. Over the next hour, Charles coordinated with Nigean Defense Forces and incoming Earth reinforcements. As the deadline approached, he returned to the command center, his decision made. Open the channel, he ordered. The gravelly voice returned. Have you made your choice, human? Charles took a deep breath. I have. But before I give you my answer, I have a counter-proposal. I've recently been offered a position on the Galactic Council as a special envoy for human-alien relations. If you truly want to change the galactic order, why not work within the system? I could be your voice on the council. A long silence followed. Finally, the voice spoke again, this time with a hint of intrigue. An interesting proposition. Perhaps we've underestimated you, human. We'll be in touch. As the transmission ended, Charles felt a wave of relief wash over him. He turned to find Admiral Reeves's hologram had reappeared. Quick thinking, Captain, she said, a rare smile on her face. The Council will be impressed. Speaking of which, have you considered their offer? Charles nodded, his decision crystallizing. I have, Admiral. I accept the position. Over the next few weeks, Charles threw himself into preparations for his new role. He oversaw the final details of the cultural exchange program, working closely with Nigean officials to ensure its success. On the day of the first official human-Nigean cultural exchange, the capital city of Nigeria was alive with excitement. Charles stood on a stage in the city's main square, surrounded by a sea of shimmering Nigean scales and the eager faces of human diplomats. Naya stood beside him, her scales a brilliant blue in the bright sunlight. Jackson, Zara, Lyra, and Vex were also present, their faces beaming with pride. As Charles prepared to deliver his speech, a murmur rippled through the crowd. He looked up to see a familiar figure striding towards the stage. Admiral Helena Reeves, in full-dress uniform, approached the podium. She nodded to Charles before addressing the crowd. "In light of recent events and the success of this diplomatic mission," she announced, her voice carrying across the square, "Earth's government has decided to upgrade our presence on Nigeria. We will be establishing a full embassy, with Jackson Adams appointed as the official liaison between the Nigerian government and Earth's diplomatic corps." The crowd erupted in cheers, scales shimmering in a dazzling display of color. Charles felt a swell of pride as he watched Jackson step forward, his face a mixture of shock and elation. As the ceremony continued, Charles couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. His instincts, honed by years of diplomatic missions, told him something was amiss. His suspicions were confirmed moments later when a series of small explosions rocked the square. Panic spread through the crowd as a thick purple smoke began to fill the air. "Purity front!" someone shouted, and Charles saw a group of Nigerians with deep crimson scales pushing through the chaos. Despite the pain in his still-healing shoulder, Charles sprang into action. He coordinated with Nigerian security forces, helping to guide civilians to safety while containing the extremists. In the midst of the commotion, he spotted Naya. She was hunched over a piece of equipment, her scales flickering rapidly as she worked. "What are you doing?" Charles shouted over the din. Naya looked up, her eyes bright with perseverance. "I'm creating a makeshift filter to neutralize the smoke. I just need a few more minutes." Charles nodded, positioning himself to protect Naya as she worked. He watched in amazement as she combined Nigerian technology with her knowledge of xenobiology, her hands moving with practiced precision. Finally, Naya activated the device. A pulse of energy rippled through the square, dissipating the purple smoke. The panic subsided as people realized the danger had passed. In the aftermath of the attack, Charles found himself inundated with messages of support and admiration. The incident, broadcast live across Nigeria and Earth, had showcased the potential benefits of human-Nigerian cooperation. As the day drew to a close, Charles received a message from the Galactic Council. His first assignment as special envoy would be to mediate a territorial dispute between two alien races in a nearby star system. He turned to share the news with Naya, only to find her deep in conversation with a human official. As she finished, she approached Charles, her scales shimmering with excitement. "I've been offered accelerated entry into the xenobiology program on Earth," she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and uncertainty. "I could start my studies much sooner than expected." Charles felt a mix of emotions at her words. He was thrilled for her opportunity, but couldn't help feeling a pang of sadness at the thought of their separation. As he processed this information, his communicator chimed. An encrypted message flashed across the screen, its contents sending a chill down his spine. The message hinted at a conspiracy involving rogue elements from both human and Nigerian societies, working together to undermine interspecies cooperation. The implications were staggering. Charles looked up, meeting Naya's curious gaze. He knew he had a crucial decision to make. Should he inform the Galactic Council about this potential threat, possibly delaying his diplomatic mission, or should he investigate quietly on his own? As he weighed his options, Charles realized that his experiences on Nigeria had prepared him for challenges on a galactic scale. The bizarre alien law that had initially brought him here had set in motion a series of events that could reshape the future of interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. With a deep breath, Charles prepared to make his decision, knowing that whatever choice he made would have far-reaching consequences for the future of human-alien relations and the stability of the galactic community. Charles stared at the encrypted message, his mind racing. The potential threat to human-Nigerian relations was too significant to ignore, but he couldn't risk alerting the conspirators by involving the Galactic Council. He made his decision. "Naya," he said, looking up from his communicator, I need to postpone my departure for the council mission. Something's come up. Naya's scales flickered with concern. Is everything all right? I'm not sure, Charles replied, his voice low. But I need to find out. He quickly contacted Admiral Reeves and Jackson, arranging a secure meeting. Within hours, they gathered in a private room at the Nigerian embassy, the air thick with tension. What we're about to discuss doesn't leave this room, Charles began, activating a holographic display of the encrypted message. As he explained the situation, Admiral Reeves's hologram flickered with agitation. A conspiracy against the Alliance? She asked, her voice sharp. We can't let this stand. Jackson nodded, his face set with willpower. We need to investigate this quietly. If we're dealing with extremists from both sides, any official action could tip them off. Charles agreed. We'll form a small task force. Admiral, can you provide us with resources without raising suspicion? Consider it done, Reeves replied. I'll assign a team of our best analysts to support you from Earth. Over the next few days, Charles and Jackson worked tirelessly, sifting through data and following leads. They set up a secure communication channel with Reeves's team on Earth, coordinating their efforts across light years. Their breakthrough came when they uncovered a series of encrypted transmissions between Earth and Nigeria. The task force's decryption specialists worked around the clock, finally cracking the code. Charles's blood ran cold as he read the decrypted messages. It's worse than we thought, he said to Jackson, who stood beside him. They're planning to use a bioweapon. The messages revealed a chilling plot. A group of human extremists, led by former diplomat Victor Hawthorne, had allied with Nigerian isolationists. Their goal, to sabotage the cultural exchange program and reignite tensions between humans and Nigerians. They've engineered a virus, Charles explained during their next briefing with Admiral Reeves. It causes mild symptoms in humans, but severe reactions in Nigerians. Reeves' hologram paced back and forth. Do we know where they're operating from? Jackson stepped forward, pulling up a holographic map. We've traced their communications to this location, he said, highlighting a point on one of Nigeria's moons. It's an abandoned research facility. Charles studied the map, his mind already formulating a plan. We need to move fast. Admiral, can you assemble a team of operatives? We'll need both humans and Nigerians for this. As they prepared for the mission, Charles received a message from Naya, now on Earth for her xenobiology studies. His heart lifted as he saw her face on the screen. Charles, I've made a discovery, she said, her scales shimmering with excitement. I've been studying the virus data you sent. My understanding of both human and Nigerian biology might be key to developing a cure or vaccine. Charles felt a surge of hope. That's incredible, Naya. Keep working on it. We might need that information soon. With Naya's findings incorporated into their plan, the task force launched their operation. Charles led a small team, including Jackson and a group of specially trained operatives, towards the moon base. As their stealth shuttle approached the facility, Charles briefed the team one last time. Remember, our primary objective is to secure the virus and any related research. Capture Hawthorne if possible, but don't take unnecessary risks. They breached the facility's outer defenses with relative ease, but as they penetrated deeper, they encountered heavy resistance. Alarms blared as they fought their way through corridors filled with armed conspirators. In the heat of battle, Charles found himself face to face with Victor Hawthorne. The former diplomat's eyes blazed with hatred. Adams, Hawthorne spat, you ruined everything. My career, my reputation, all because you succeeded where I failed. Charles dodged a blast from Hawthorne's weapon, understanding, dawning. This wasn't just about ideology, it was personal. Victor, it doesn't have to end this way, Charles called out, taking cover behind a console. We can still find a peaceful solution. Hawthorne's laugh was bitter. Peace? There can be no peace between species. You'll see that soon enough. A firefight erupted, forcing Charles to fall back. As he regrouped with Jackson, a chilling announcement came over the facility's comm system. Attention all personnel, Hawthorne's voice rang out. The packages have been dispatched. I repeat, the packages are en route to Earth and Nigeria. Charles's blood ran cold. They were too late to stop the initial release of the virus. He had to make a decision, and fast. "Jackson," he said, his voice tight with urgency, "take half the team and head back to Nigeria with a sample of the virus. I'll lead the rest to Earth. We need to warn both planets and prepare containment measures." As they prepared to split up, Charles's team managed to capture one of Hawthorne's lieutenants. The intel they extracted was crucial. Details about the planned attacks, potential release sites, and the virus's dispersal method. Charles relayed this information to Admiral Reeves as his team raced towards Earth. "Admiral, we need containment teams ready on both planets. And get me in touch with Naya. Her research might be our best shot at stopping this thing." As their ship hurtled through space, Charles felt the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. The virus was out there, Hawthorne was still at large, and time was running out. But as he looked at his team, human and Nigen, working side by side, he knew they had a fighting chance. The future of human-Nigean relations hung in the balance, and the next few hours would determine the fate of countless lives across two worlds. Charles steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that the true test of his abilities was yet to come. Charles gripped the edge of his seat as the ship hurtled through space towards Earth. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and every second counted. His communicator chirped, breaking the tense silence. "Charles, it's Naya." Her voice crackled through the speaker. Her scales flickered rapidly in the holographic display, a sign of excitement and urgency. "Go ahead, Naya," Charles replied, leaning forward. "I've done it," she said, her eyes bright. "I've developed a rapid detection method for the virus, and I'm close to finalizing a neutralizing agent, but I need more time." Charles felt a surge of hope. "That's incredible work, Naya. How much more time do you need?" "A few hours at most," she replied. "But Charles, you need to contain any potential outbreaks until then." "Understood," he nodded. "We're about to land. I'll coordinate with Earth's security forces immediately." As soon as the ship touched down, Charles sprang into action. He gathered his team and local security personnel in a makeshift command center. "We have intel on 3 possible release sites," Charles announced, pulling up a holographic map. "The major spaceport here, this metropolitan area, and the Cultural Exchange Center where our Nigean representatives are stationed." He turned to his team. "We'll split into 3 groups. Alpha team, take the spaceport. Beta, the metro area. I'll lead Gamma to the Exchange Center." As the teams dispersed, Charles headed for the Cultural Exchange Center. The building loomed before him, its sleek architecture a blend of human and Nigean design. Inside, he could hear the murmur of a crowd. Charles spotted Zara, Lyra, and Vex on a raised platform, demonstrating intricate Nigean gestures to an enthralled audience. He made his way through the crowd, catching Zara's eye. "We need to clear the building," he whispered urgently as he reached them. "Potential bioweapon threat, but we can't cause a panic." Zara's scales rippled with alarm, but she maintained her composure. "Leave it to us," she murmured. Charles watched in admiration as the 3 Nigeans smoothly transitioned their demonstration into a guided tour, slowly but surely leading the crowd towards the exits. As the last of the civilians filtered out, Charles's instincts prickled. Something was off. He scanned the now empty atrium, his eyes landing on a figure ducking behind a pillar. "Hawthorne," Charles breathed, recognizing the former diplomat. He took off after Hawthorne, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The chase led them through winding corridors and up staircases. Charles's communicator buzzed with updates from the other teams. "Spaceport secure, no sign of the virus," came the report from Alpha Team. "Metro area clear," Beta Team confirmed moments later. Charles allowed himself a moment of relief as he burst onto the roof, cornering Hawthorne. "It's over, Victor," Charles called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "Your plan has failed." Hawthorne's face contorted with rage. He pulled out a small canister, holding it over the edge of the roof. "Not yet, Adams," he snarled. "One drop of this and it's all over. For you, for me, for everyone down there." Charles tensed, assessing the situation. Hawthorne's finger hovered over the canister's release mechanism. One wrong move could spell disaster. "Think about what you're doing, Victor," Charles said, taking a cautious step forward. Is this really what you want? To be responsible for countless deaths? Hawthorne's hand trembled. You don't understand, he spat. This was never about deaths. It was about proving a point. We can't coexist. We shouldn't try. But we are coexisting, Charles countered. Look at what we've accomplished together. The cultural exchange, the scientific breakthroughs. We're stronger united than divided. For a moment, doubt flickered across Hawthorne's face. Charles seized the opportunity, lunging forward. Hawthorne, startled, lost his grip on the canister. It tumbled over the edge of the roof. Without hesitation, Charles dove after it. He felt the rush of air as he plummeted, his hand outstretched. His fingers closed around the canister mere inches from the ground. He tucked and rolled, absorbing the impact of the fall. Above, he heard a commotion. Looking up, he saw Zara, Lyra, and Vex subduing Hawthorne. Their movements were synchronized, a perfect blend of Nijin martial arts and human restraint techniques. As Charles caught his breath, his communicator chirped. Charles, Naya's voice came through, tinged with excitement. The neutralizing agent is ready. We can counteract the virus now. Relief washed over Charles. But it was short-lived as another message came in from Jackson on Nijia. We're still tracking the virus shipment here. We need more information. Charles looked at the captured Hawthorne, an idea forming. Naya, meet us on Nijia and bring the neutralizing agent. We're not done yet. As they prepared for the journey to Nijia, Charles couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and dread. The crisis on Earth had been averted, but the threat still loomed over Nijia, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger challenge, one that would test the limits of human-Nijin cooperation and shape the future of interstellar relations.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.